Hello students, today we will study about chapter force and friction of 8th class. Now in this chapter we will study about different topics. The topics are force. First topic is force. What is force? What are the effects of force? After that we will discuss about different types of force. Now later on in this chapter we will also discuss about friction. Now friction is also a type of force, so we will study friction in detail. Now what are the topic we will study in friction? Factor affecting the frictions, what are the advantage and disadvantage of friction, and how we can increase and decrease the friction.
So students, as introduction is already been mentioned by me, so we directly go to a topic, force. So what is force? Force is a push or pull on any object is called force. Now whenever we push the object or pull the object, so that is referred as force. Now there are two examples are given. Suppose any guest or neighbor come in your house, so you open the gate so that they come inside the house. Similarly, if you're running on a track, so if anything lying in your way, like a box or a stone, so you apply the force to move it out of the track. So these are the two examples which is given over here, examples of force. Now next thing is force have a magnitude and a direction associated with it. What does it mean? So whenever you find the force, take an example like 4 Newton towards east. So this is example of force. So whenever you find any force written over anywhere, so you will find that there is a magnitude is always over there. Magnitude is a number like 1 2 3 4 5 6 etc etc, and you always find direction like east west north south. So you always find that force is always written with the help of magnitude and direction. Now you find you as I mentioned the example for Newton. So there Newton is a unit of the force. So as a unit of force is Newton, and CGS unit of force is dyne. And one more thing to remember it, like 1 Newton is equal to the 10 की power 5 dyne. Okay. Now let us move to the next topic, effects of force. Now effects of force is basically the application of force, means whenever the force is applied, now what happened. So that is referred as effects of force. So there are mainly 5 effects of force which can be observed generally. So we start with the very first one. It can make the stationary object move. Suppose a object is at rest. Okay, object is at rest. Now what happened to make it move? I apply the force. Now the object will start moving. Next thing is it can change the speed of the object. So the whenever you apply the force or on the application of force, either the speed of the object will increase, either the speed of the object will decrease. So how it will increase and how it will decrease, we study with the help of example. Suppose your friend is riding a bicycle and you start pushing him from the back. So what will happen, what will you observe, that the bicycle start moving faster, or with the speed of the bicycle is increases. Now next thing, if you pull the bicycle towards the other end, for what you will observe, that the bicycle may stop or the speed of the bicycle will slow down or decrease. Next effect is next effect, it can stop the moving object. Suppose previously a body is always rolling, so I apply the force, so what will happen, the object will come to the rest. So if a body is in motion, so on the application of force, the body will come to rest. Similar thing you can observe, like whenever in the match of football, whenever the football is coming towards the goalkeeper apply the force to stop the football. Next thing is it can change the direction of the moving object. So in the match of football, in the match of hockey, you will observe different players are there, so they will apply different force, so that what will happen, the direction of the football, direction of the ball will change. So that's why force is required to change the direction of the object. Next thing, next, it can change the size and shape of the object, so which you might observe at your home also. Like you might have seen your mother cook rolling the chapati. So what will you observe whenever she roll the chapati or dough with the help of a rolling pin? So what will happen? The size and shape of the dough will change. So that's how the force will result into the change in shape and size of the object. Now we will study about resultant force. When the resultant force come into play. So when two or more forces acting on an object simultaneously, so that time to study the effect of the force, we have to take consideration of the resultant force. Is it clear? Now the very first thing is when two or more force act on an object in the same direction. As you see here, there is a box lying on the floor and there are two forces F1 and F2 applied on it. So F1 first force is 2 Newton and second force is 5 Newton. Okay, now the total force on the object is a sum of the forces. So in that case, if both the forces applied on the same direction, so the resultant force will be the sum of these both forces. So the resultant force will be F1 plus F2 or 5 plus 2 equals to 7 Newton. Okay, so the total force is 7 Newton towards east. Okay, as you can see here, it is east, it is west, it is north, and this one is south. Okay, now next thing, if two forces act on an object in opposite direction, then the total force is a difference between the two forces. So it is just the opposite one. Here the forces are applied in the same direction, but what will happen, the force is applied in the opposite direction. So in this case, two forces are there same. F1 is equal to 5 Newton and F2 is equal to 2 Newton. So the resultant force in this case will be the difference between the two, F1 minus F2. Is it clear? So if you can see here carefully, the force F1 5 Newton is moving towards the east and F2 2 Newton is applying towards the west direction. So we will apply the 5 minus 2 equals to 3 Newton. So this force is bigger. So what will happen? The effect of force will you observe that the box will be moving in the east direction. Box will be moving towards east direction. So in this way we can study the effects of the force by calculating the resultant force. Now one more thing is there, next point, if the direction, suppose the force is same, only the direction is changing or the magnitude of the force applied change, so then also the effect of the force will be change according to the change in the direction or the magnitude of the force. Is it clear? Now next is classification of force or types of force. There are mainly two types of force. The very first one is contact force, next one is non-contact force. As you, it is understood by the help of its name, contact force. So whenever the forces which are applied by the help of contact, okay, so that is known as contact force. Take an example. Whenever I write by the help of my pen on the paper, so I apply a force by the help of this pen or by the help of this nib. So that is an example of the contact force because this pen and this paper is in contact at that time. It is understood. So contact force are those forces that acts on an object by direct or indirect physical contact are called contact force. So there are mainly two type of contact forces there, applied force and frictional force. Okay, what are that? Applied force and frictional force. Now let us study about applied force and frictional force. Applied force, if we apply force to do work such as lifting a school bag, paddling, so or if we apply any muscular force, so that is referred as applied force. Okay, so example, muscular force and mechanical force are example of the applied force. Now second one is frictional force. Okay, frictional force will study about the force which resists the motion of two surfaces in contact. So what is frictional force? So whenever two objects are in contact with each other such that any object will start or any surface start moving, The other surface will apply a friction opposite force, and that force is known as frictional force, which oppose the motion. There are many examples in real life you can observe, like whenever a batsman hits the cricket ball, so the ball roll on the ground, and you will observe that after traveling certain distance the ball comes to rest. Why it comes to rest? Because of the frictional force applied by the ground. Now, similarly, one more example is given over here. When you kick a football on the ground, so what you will observe that the football comes to rest after traveling certain distance. And why it comes to rest? Because the ground will offer opposite force, and that force is frictional force which oppose the motion. Now, next topic we will study about non-contact forces. So, as the name suggests, the forces which comes into play whenever two objects are not in contact with each other. So, such type of forces are referred as non-contact force. Now, there are mainly three examples of non-contact force: gravitational force, electrostatic force, and magnetic force. So these are the three main non-contact force which are mentioned over here. Now let us start by the very first non-contact force, that is gravitational force. So the force which acts between two objects having some mass and separated by some distance is called gravitational force. So what does it mean? Now whenever you have two objects which are having some mass and you separate them by some distance, so there is attractive force which is present between them. So that attractive force is referred as gravitational force, it depending upon the mass of the objects. Understand? So take an example. You see here there are two objects A and B. A is having a mass ma and B is having a mass of mb. So the attractive force which is present between them is referred as gravitational force. Okay, now that gravitational force depending upon the mass. So what happen if the mass of A is more? So what happen, it apply more gravitational force towards B, so the B will move towards A less more as compared to A. Next force is electrostatic force. Electro means electric charge or electricity. Static means at rest. So the force which is present between two charges, okay, either positive or either negative. So the force between two charges, positive and negative, which are separated by some distance, is referred as electrostatic force. Understand? In this force the charges are at rest. Okay, so we have taken, there are two type of charges are there, positive and negative. So there are three cases which you can see here. When the positive charge is placed at some distance from another positive charge. Next one is case 2, when negative charge is placed at some distance from another negative charge. And case 3, when positive charge is placed at some distance from a negative charge. So these are the three cases which we will study. So you will observe here, when two charges are placed, two same charge, positive and positive, when they are present nearby to each other or separated by some distance, then you will find that they will repel each other. Okay, similarly when you place negative and negative charge separated by some distance, you will observe that there is a force which repel both the charge. That means this negative charge go in this direction, this negative charge go in this direction. Okay, one go towards east, one go towards west. And why they go away from each other? Because of the presence of electrostatic force between them. Similarly, if positive charge is placed in at some distance from the negative charge, then you will observe that both the charge will move towards each other. So in this case the negative charge will move towards the west and the positive charge will move towards the east. So they are coming close to each other. And why they're coming close to each other? Because of the presence of electrostatic force between them. So what you will study from these three cases in figure A and B, you will understand that same charges always repel each other. And in case C, you will observe that in third case you will observe that the opposite charge always attract each other. So this thing you need to remember it, that like charge repel each other and unlike charge attract each other. Now, next force we will study about magnetic force. What is magnetic force? So, the force between two magnetic poles is referred as magnetic force. As you know, on a magnet there are two poles, north pole and south pole. So, if you bring two magnets nearby each other, so what will happen? The pole will interact with each other. So, the force which is present between the two poles, or which acts between the two poles of the magnets, so that force is referred as magnetic force. So here two cases are mentioned. When north pole of one magnet come close towards the south pole of the another magnet, and second case, what will we observe? The north pole of first magnet is coming closer to the north pole of the other magnet. So in both the case we will observe that north pole and north south, when north pole come close to south pole, then both the pole will attract each other. So, and but in the other case, when north pole comes in contact with north pole, then what will happen? They will repel each other. And why we repel each other and why they attract each other? Because of the presence of a force, and that force is referred as magnetic force. Similarly, what you will understand here, that unlike pole or different poles always attract each other, and like pole or similar pole will always repel each other. So if you bring south pole of one magnet, if you bring south pole of one magnet with the other south pole of second magnet, then what will you observe? That both the magnet will repel each other. And why they repel each other? Because of the presence of the magnetic force. Now, as I mentioned you earlier also, that there are some other unit of force except Newton and Dyne. They are kilogram force and gram force. Now 1 kilogram force is equal to the 1000 gram force, and 1 kilogram force is equal to the 9.8 Newton. So these values are very crucial while doing the numericals. Okay, now next is friction. So next topic is friction. Now what is friction? As I already told you before, the force which oppose the motion when two objects are in contact with each other, so that force is referred as friction. Now why the friction comes? Okay, what is the cause of the friction? What is the reason behind the friction? Now, there are two main reasons of the friction. One is irregularity and another one is force of adhesion. Adhesion means attraction. Okay, so as you know, all the surface have irregularities. That means that all the surface practically you will observe around you, they always have irregularity, means they are not smooth, they are always rough. Okay, so rough surface has more regularity while smooth surface have less irregularity, means irregularity is always there on all the surface. So what happen whenever two surface come in contact? So these irregularity they get interlock. Okay, they get interlock. So what will happen? So you can understand by this picture, there is two surface, surface 1 and surface 2. So what you will observe, that these are the irregularities. Okay, these are the cavity. So what happened? The this tooth, okay, this tooth of surface 1 will stick into the interlock between the cavity of surface 2. So they get interlocked, these two surfaces get interlocked. So what will happen? So it's very hard to make them move. So friction comes because of the irregularity. And what will happen when they get interlocked? So these both surface come, the atoms and molecule present between these surface, they comes very close to each other. So what will happen between them? Attractive force is there, so that force is referred as force of adhesion. So due to irregularity and force of adhesion, what is there? Friction is there, which oppose a motion, or which does not allow the object to move over the other surface. Now, factors affecting the friction. Okay, there are mainly two factors which affect the friction or which depend upon friction, but third is also there, and we will study about them. So, very first factor which depend on friction, that is the weight of the objects. So more the weight of the object, more is the frictional force which is applied by the surface on that object. Okay, so the force of friction is directly proportional to the weight of the body. That means more the weight of the body, more the frictional force applied. Okay, directly, that is the means of directly proportional. Less the weight, less is the frictional force applied by the body. Okay, so more the weight, more will be the friction force between the object and the surface. How you can understand? Suppose if I tell you to move this pen, okay, and if I tell you to move a truck out on the road, so when you apply the force, so what will happen? The pen will start moving. That means the frictional force applied by the surface is less in this case. But if you try to move the tractor or truck on the road, okay, no matter how much you push, the truck will not move. Why it does not move? Because of the very large weight. So what will happen? The surface will apply, due to the surface apply large friction, so that the truck will not move on the road. It is clear. Now the second thing is nature of the surface in contact. So frictional force depend upon the nature of the surface. That means either the surface is rough, either the surface is smooth, as I discussed you earlier. Because smooth surface have less irregularity, so less is a friction in those surface, and rough surface is have more irregularity. So what will happen? The friction force applied is much more. Okay, so you can observe this, like whenever you're moving on a road, as you see the road is very rough. Okay, so you can move easily, okay, without slipping. But when you try to move on a marble floor, which is having some polish or having some soapy water, so what happened when you try to move? So what happened? There are less irregularity between smooth surface. So what happened? You cannot walk properly because of less friction. So that what will happen? Friction force is less over there. Similar thing you can observe. You can take two surface. Okay, you can take two surface. Okay, it is surface 1, it is surface 2. Okay, now it is a ball of same size. Now what will happen? This surface is rough and this surface is smooth. So when you roll the ball, you will notice that the ball will come to rest at this after traveling this distance. But here the surface smooth, so you will observe that the ball will come to rest after traveling this much distance. So what does it mean? That the ball on this floor, on this surface, travel more distance. Why? Because of less friction on this surface, and this surface being rough in nature apply more friction. So what will happen? The ball will come to rest because of large frictional force applied by this surface. Okay, now next thing is frictional force does not depend upon the area of contact. Means it doesn't matter how much area of contact with the surface is. It matters only either the nature of the surface and the weight of the objects. On these two factors the frictional force depends. It does not depend how much area of contact is. Next is types of friction. So mainly in your book, according to your syllabus, you will study that there are three types of friction. One is sliding friction, one is rolling friction, another one is drag. Okay, so first of all we will study about this one, and then we will study, I will tell you some other classification of friction. Okay, now what is sliding friction? As the name suggests, slide means to slip. So when the friction force which acts when an object slide over the other. Okay, suppose it is a ground and this is a box. So when the box slides, okay, over this floor, so frictional force present between them is known as sliding friction. So as you see here, there is a hook on the box and a man is pulling the box with the help of string. So what will happen? The box is moving in this direction. So what will happen? The floor will try apply a frictional force in the opposite direction to make the objects to stop the objects. Next one is rolling friction. Now, what is rolling friction? So, when a surface roll over the other, so frictional force in between them is referred as a rolling friction. Here you see here there is a wheel here. Wheel is moving down on the road. So direction of this is the direction of motion of the wheel. So what will happen? The surface, the ground will apply a frictional force in the opposite direction, and in both the case you will notice that rolling friction is less as compared to the sliding friction. Is that clear? Okay. Now we will study the next type of friction, that is drag. Okay, so drag, the frictional force which occur in the fluid, that is known as drag. Now the question comes into our mind, what is fluid? So fluid are those things, are those matter which can flow, like liquid and gas. So liquid and gas are collectively called as fluids. So a frictional force which occur in the fluid, so that is referred as drag. So when an aeroplane move in the sky, so what happened, the air try to slow down the aeroplane speed, so by the help of drag. And similarly, whenever the submarine move into the water, or whenever the boat move on the water, so what happened, the water will try to oppose the motion of the boat or motion of the submarine by applying the drag on it. Okay, so in this thing you in this figure a boat is given over here. So boat is moving in a forward direction, okay, the direction of motion of the boat, and this is a water. So you will notice that the frictional force or drag applied on the boat will slow down the speed of the boat, and it is moving, it is in the opposite direction of the motion of the boat. Now this frictional force can be applied by the water and can be applied by the air. Now next topic we will study about advantages of friction. Now there are several advantages of friction. We will go through one by one. So very first advantage is friction between the pen and the paper enable us to write. As I told you that when we write, so what happened, the pen, the nib of the pen and the paper is in contact with each other. So due to the frictional force that is present between the pen and the paper, we are able to write. Okay, if there is no friction we cannot write on the paper. Next thing is, we friction between our feet and the ground enable us to walk easily. So what it means that due to the frictional force present between the ground and our feet, that's why we can walk easily. If there is less friction we cannot walk easily, and you will notice also on the smooth surface we cannot walk properly, we slip. Why? Because of less frictional force present between our feet and the ground. Now next is friction between the road and the tire allow the vehicles to move without skidding. So that means because of the frictional force between the road and tires of the vehicle, so because of the frictional force the vehicle can move easily without sliding down on the surface or without sliding on the road. So similarly the frictional force present between objects and our hand. So frictional force is there, like suppose I'm holding the pen, why am I able to hold the pen? Because the frictional force present between the pen and the my fingers. So friction between the objects and the hand help us to make the grip on the objects. Many other advantages of the friction is there, like whenever you apply the brakes on a car or on a bicycle, you will notice that the brake pads apply the friction on the tires, so that's why the tire will stop, and that's why your vehicle or your bicycle comes to rest. So due to this advantage, these are the advantages of the friction. Now let us go to the disadvantages of the friction. Now what are the disadvantages of frictions? First is friction cause a moving object to stop or slow down. That means that whenever frictional force is there, the object will slow down automatically. That means suppose if a ball is going Okay, if a ball is rolling on the floor, you will notice that the ball will slow down or stop. So similarly, whenever any moving parts is there of a machine, so what will happen, the moving part of the machine comes to rest. And why they comes to rest? Because of the frictional force present between the machine parts. Okay, and next disadvantage is friction can lead to the loss of energy. So you can also understand this, when you run the fan for some ceiling fan for some time, and you will notice that when you touch the fan after 1 hour 2 hour, you will notice that the fan becomes heat or hot. And why it becomes hot? Because of friction between the moving machine parts of the fan. So that's why friction can lead to the loss of energy. That means at that time all the electrical energy not converted into wind energy, some of the energy get lost or wasted in the form of the heat. Okay, so these are the two disadvantages of the friction. Third one is the friction cause wear and tear of the moving machine parts. That means when you use the machine for a long period of time, then what will happen? The machine parts become damaged. You can understand this, like I mentioned you, that whenever we apply the brakes of the bicycle, the brake pads apply the frictional force between the tires and the brake pads. So you will see after some time, after repeating use of that brake pads, you will notice that the brake pads started become wear and tear. So that's why after some time you need to change the brake pads so that they work properly. So whenever friction is there, friction cause wear and tear of moving machine parts. Okay, so these are the disadvantages of the friction. Now, next topic is steps to reduce friction. How we can decrease the friction. So friction can be decreased by the following steps. So very first step is by polishing the surface. As we know that rough surface offer more friction and smooth surface offer less friction. So when we convert the rough surface into smooth surface, so in this way friction can be decreased. Now next thing is by applying the oil and grease on the in between the surfaces. Now you will notice that like a table fan is there or ceiling fan is there. Now what will happen after some years or after using for long period of time, they are start making some type of sound, cracking sounds. So to reduce the sound, the mechanic put the grease in between the moving parts, machine parts. So why he put the machine oil and grease in between them? Because oil and grease form the layer between the machine parts. So what will happen, which will reduce the chance of interlocking, so that what will happen, friction can be decreased in this way. And this technique by in which we apply oil or grease in between the moving mechanical or machine parts, it is known as lubrication. Now next is by using the ball bearing. Now the question comes, what is ball bearing? All of you might have, if you have opened some electrical equipment, you might have seen some kind of round device, and that device is known as ball bearing. Now in ball bearing, what is there? One inner surface is there and one outer surface is there. Here I'm calling inner surface as surface 2 and outer surface as surface 1. In between both the surface 1 and 2, there is some ball is present, and these balls help to convert the sliding friction into rolling friction. So in this way the friction can be reduced. So ball bearing help to reduce the friction by converting the sliding friction between the mechanical parts or machine parts into the rolling friction. So in this way the friction can be reduced. Now next is how you can reduce the friction by making the body streamline or by converting the shape of the object into a streamlined shape. Now what is streamlined shape? So streamlined shape or streamlined body is that body which is narrower in the front, which is narrower in the back, which is broad in the center. So this type of particular shape is referred as streamlined shape. All of you might have seen the shape of a boat, the shape of a fish, the shape of aeroplane, submarine. So all those shapes are referred as streamlined shape. Now A streamlined shape help to reduce the friction by adjusting the movement of airflow so that the air and water does not offer much friction or much drag. So in this way it can be reduced. Now next is how you can reduce the friction by sprinkling soft or fine powder. So you might have seen whenever you play carom board, I hope that you have played carom ball with your friends, with your family. So what you will observe that when you put a fine powder on the carom board, you will observe that the striker move very fastly or easily on the carom board, or it will travel a large distance. Why? Because at that time the board will offer less friction so that the striker can travel large distance. So by sprinkling soft fine powder on the floor or on the surface, in this way you can reduce the friction. Now how we can increase the friction? So friction can be increased by the following steps. So very first step is, now steps now steps to increase friction. So now steps to increase friction. So friction can be increased by the following ways. So very first is tires of a vehicle or have treads. So you might have seen the tires have some kind of marking, and that marking is referred as tracks. And soles of our shoes have grooves, and soles of our shoes also have some kind of pattern, and that pattern on that holes or gap is referred as grooves. So that tread and grooves help to increase the friction. They help to bind. They help providing a irregular surface so that the ground can make the grip. So in this way the friction can be increased. Roads are made rough. You might have seen the roads, they are rough. Why they are rough? So that the vehicles can move easily without slipping. Or next thing is, spike on the soles of mountaineers help to make good grip on ice. So you might have seen the cricketer, the players which play in the grass field, they have some kind of spikes on the soles of their feet. Similarly, the mountaineers also have a spikes on the soles of their shoes. And why they are there? So that they can make good grip either on the ground, either on the icy surface which is very smooth. So in this way you can increase the friction. So this is the chapter.
Hello students, I hope you understand all the basic things which are there in this chapter. If there is anything you want to ask, you can leave in the comment section down below. Please like my channel, subscribe my channel, and don't forget to share more and more. Thank you.